You thought I was gonna forget about that paw print, didn't you? Nope.
I'd say 1996 was a significant year for film and animation. Cartoon Network began success with Dexter's Laboratory, many blockbuster films got critical acclaim or became cult classics, and Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny were brought together at last.
Oh, look out for that first step, Doc. It's a real Lulu.
Bugs Bunny.
Nickelodeon was especially significant this year. The network got its first movie, Rugrats resumed production with a Hanukkah special, Herb Scannell became president of Nickelodeon, and many iconic shows premiered, one of which I already expressed my appreciation for, including a certain educational show that would change the way children watch and learn. Yes, of course, I'm talking about Blue's Clues. As a child, I was glued to the television watching this show, and as an adult, I appreciate even more what all the effort put into it. It combines the educational aspects of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood with the live-action hybrid of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The show's visuals also stuck with me. It's what inspired me to study animation and art in the first place. I would draw everything I remember from the show, and I mean everything. I even made recreations of some of the backgrounds from the show in Photoshop. My first memories of watching the show were on video, and the rest was history. It was a cultural phenomenon, being referenced in numerous TV shows and short films.
Of Greenie the Clue Dog! Arf, arf.
Bro, that's a different show.
I binge-watched the show in summer 2021, and by binge-watching I mean the first 3 seasons, the first episodes of Season 4, and most of Season 5, but not Season 6. I've seen snippets of Blue's Clues and You and Nick Jr., but never actually paid close attention. I know most people might say who their favorite host was, but honestly, I believe all eras had their strengths and weaknesses. There are some episodes I don't even remember watching when I was young. So this retrospective gives me an opportunity to reevaluate my thoughts on this show, especially that my knowledge has increased since I was young. I'll be covering the original Blue's Clues, Blue's Room, Blue's Clues and You, Blue's Big City Adventure, and some of the games. Now that I'm in my reviewing chair, let's look back at the show and see what made it so impactful.
It'll be great.
For most of this review, I'll be using Diane Tracy's Blue's Clues for Success book to discuss behind-the-scenes info. Diane Tracy is an author and speaker who wrote this book out of appreciation for the crew. I got this for my birthday last February, which makes this extra special. I also used bits of Wikipedia as a starting guide. Anyway, let's begin. The show was created by 3 people, Tracy Page Johnson, Todd Kessler, and Angela Santamiro. Prior to BC, the Children's Television Act of 1990 was passed by Congress, which required commercial television broadcasts to provide educational or informational programming. Back then, PBS was the main source of educational television. Nickelodeon was a cable station that met the criteria to a T, being a kids' first network. Nickelodeon had already launched a block providing entertainment for preschools titled Nick Jr. in 1988, their first programming being Eureka's Castle. However, they sought to be the new standard for children's television after PBS. Nick Jr. held a summit meeting of teachers, child psychologists, and child development experts to reinvent television for children. A belief was held that television could be a positive influence on the little kitty kids. A certain person at that summit was Dr. Dan Anderson, a psychologist that demonstrated children wanted to be challenged by television. They could pay attention for extended periods of time as well. This is where Nick Jr. adopted their mission to help kids understand the world and themselves through playing, hence their slogan, Play to Learn. During the summit, executive producer and vice president of production and development, Brown Johnson, proposed the idea of a game show for preschoolers, since that was a hot topic for Nickelodeon at the time. Game shows will require thinking and playing along. It was such an out there idea, yet this could put Nick Jr. on the map. This is where co-creator Angela Santamiro saw the opportunity to make a groundbreaking, innovative show. She too was on a Nick Jr. research team and had a vision of a hands-on learning program. She studied child development in college, learning about the influence on TV on children. Her thinking was Nick Jr.'s version of Barney the Dinosaur. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was also cited as a major influence, with how Mr. Rogers spoke slowly and didn't talk down to the viewers. She wanted to take what that show and Sesame Street did and take it a step further.
When I believed we had the best show on television that could educate preschoolers and positively impact their lives, I was relentless. I wanted so much to give kids a television show that celebrates how smart they are, because I truly believe they are brilliant. I also wanted to create a show that would help preschoolers feel good about themselves. It's been proven that the preschool age is the pinnacle of creating the foundation of one's self-esteem.
The board members were skeptical, but eventually approved the idea. Eventually, Todd Kessler, a freelance producer at Nick Jr., and Tracy Page Johnson, a young animator, came on board to visualize the show. Santamiro, Kessler, and Johnson envisioned concepts and the show's mission in the Viacom building at Times Square. They knew they wanted this show to be breakthrough and engaging to preschoolers. After months of brainstorming, they figured out what their mission would be, as well as a pilot that was the culmination of everything they learned about child development. And this resulted in Blueprints.
Can you help me today? What did you say?
For a while, this pilot was a mystery, becoming lost media. Clips are seen in the 10th anniversary, and Nickelodeon released more clips to celebrate the 25th anniversary. The pilot was finally discovered by YouTuber BowDown7, but was taken down by Paramount. Fortunately, several copies of the pilot were kept on the Internet Archive, one of which I downloaded. So, to make sure I don't encounter the same fate, I'll just use screenshots. Now, as far as I know, the pilot began production in 1994 and was filmed and completed in 1995. The name Blueprints came from setting out the blueprints for child development. The mission statement for the show was clear: to empower, challenge, and build the self-esteem of preschoolers while making them laugh. Blueprints was marketed as the first think-along and play-along half-hour preschool show. The pilot was tested in its early stages several times prior to completion. When it was first shown to preschoolers, it was able to keep their attention during the entire runtime, proving Dr. Dan Anderson's analysis. The concept of the show was based on tons of research, which I'll discuss later. The creators were given $150,000 to make a pilot, and they made every cost count during production. One thing that separates BC from other children's shows is the visual style. Santamiro envisioned a show featuring a live-action host and animated characters, a la Who Framed Roger Rabbit. One goal for the show was to be organic, natural, and appealing to preschoolers. BC did not look like anything else at the time. In fact, it was the first for a few things. The first preschool series to be story-driven by viewer interaction, to build self-esteem, and be produced using computers. It was unique, since most of Nick Jr.'s shows at the time were puppet-based. I'll go more in depth about that too. For the pilot, the creators came across a company called Big Pink that specialized in producing commercials to help set the look. An animator by the name of Dave Palmer was experimenting with animation using Photoshop and After Effects. He joined later in summer 1995 to work out the production process. Probably his biggest contribution was creating and adapting the design of Blue.
I remember when Tracy gave me her flat cutout design of Blue and asked me to adapt the design so it could be animated. I was anxious. I wanted to stay true to Tracy's design, but I knew I would have to put some of myself into Blue's character. I knew how she would move and bark and act, and I knew she had to be able to carry a television series over many seasons worth of shows. So, I aimed to create an engaging, lovable, fully developed character with a lot of emotion.
Blue herself originated from visuals on the pilot's initial script. She started out as an orange cat, but another show featuring a cat titled Mrs. Cherrywinkle was also in production at the time. Then Johnson drew a puppy, and that's how Blue joined the history of Blue characters. The name Blue came from discussing filming techniques such as blue screen, but the most crucial step in developing their pilot was, of course, finding the host. The host needed to be the embodiment of the show's mission statement. They were looking for a Matthew Broderick, Ferris Bueller, camp counselor kind of guy who could interact with the camera in a believable manner and didn't talk down to the younger audience. After several auditions, a young man came on thinking it was for a voiceover. This man being Stephen Burns. He met all the qualifications and was able to connect with the camera and world flawlessly. Steve basically nailed it on the first try, despite only having the blue screen to work off from. The creators knew they had found the right person. Dr. Dan Anderson's research, however, showed that children paid more attention to female hosts. This resulted in two tapes being shown to focus groups. The preschoolers, of course, was the final push for deciding. One tape had Steve, the other had a female host. Long story short, the preschoolers rose up in excitement, wanting to help Steve, and a host was born.
When I took on the role of Steve, yes, that's my real name, I never dreamed I would be part of something that would have such a powerful influence on so many children. In the beginning, it was just a job, but it wasn't long before it became something different.
As for the pilot itself, it's rough alright. There is a lack of sound effects and dialogue creating dead air, minimal music, choppy animation, awkward cuts, placeholder voices, and vastly distinctive designs. Production was not smooth sailing either, especially with the soundstage not being soundproof and having musicians live on set. Despite the rough art style and pacing, the fundamental educational structure was present from the start. If there's one thing a pilot should do, it's partly set up the tone and style of your show. And Blueprints does that to a T, or should I say, a B. Interactivity was fundamental to the story's progression and enhanced the educational value. The host carries the show with dialogue, talking directly to the camera, aka the viewers at home. Herb Scahill was impressed by the pilot, giving his support. The creators had something that was part game show and part mystery. They also wanted to get a head start on marketing. They wanted everyone to be associated with the color blue. They would constantly use words such as phenomenon and breakthrough. VHS tapes of the pilot were sent to parents and kids. Parents were clamoring about how their kids watched it constantly. The creators knew they had a hit on their hands, and Nickelodeon sold a deal. Before talking about the actual show, let's discuss the primary details and aspects of Blue's Clues. Firstly, research was essential to the show, especially for the pilot. It's one of the major factors for why the show was so successful. A full half-hour educational program that would sustain attention for 24 minutes is another story. Enter Dr. Alice Wilder, a classmate at Santa Miro, who saw the pilot and adored how her studies were being applied. Wilder would join the team as a research director, and a research department was formed, consisting of people who studied child development. Research was vital to the creative and decision-making process. Every department had to understand research and the curriculum-based aspects. Another goal of the show was to promote cognitive and problem-solving skills for preschoolers. The show wasn't afraid to challenge its younger viewers, and it did so with this philosophy. Preschoolers learn through everyday tasks. The games are designed to teach a specific skill that kids could apply in real life. The games were written within context of the script, tested and retested depending on kids' reactions. The show uses a multi-layered approach to learning, with each game gradually increasing in difficulty. Episodes center around common events for preschoolers. The show would feature elementary topics such as colors, shapes, and reading, to more complex topics such as science, physics, and anatomy. And the show can simplify these topics in a way that preschoolers understand by applying it to their everyday lives. For example, Blue Surprise at 2 o'clock teaches time by applying it to waiting, and Geography teaches geography by applying it to maps and neighborhoods. It's a pretty unique and clever way to educate youngsters. This is also why I think shows such as Cyber Chase and Marta Speaks succeed at this. The curriculum is checked by research teams to make sure episodes are meeting their goals. The process is as follows. A writer pitches an idea for an episode, as well as the skill to be learned. If preschoolers grasp that skill, a goal sheet is put together. Script drafts are examined by consultants and teachers for feedback. The script is converted to handheld manipulatives that function as games. The storyline is narrated like a storybook by one of the researchers. They take notes based on children's responses. The data is compiled and presented to the creators and crew. The script is rewritten depending on data. Episodes are tested with just the host on blue screen, and then the final episode, complete with animation and music, is shown to children for final testing. The process of making one episode takes at least 10 months or a year. Since each episode is researched 3 times during production, that's more research than any show I can think of. I commend the crew for putting that extra polish in to make sure they're getting their points across to viewers, especially when your target demographic is impressionable. In fact, this process with consultants and making sure the viewers will understand the content presented reminds me of how the Magic School Bus handles their science-related topics. Next, let's talk about the art direction of the show, since it's one of the aspects I especially love. As stated before, the show was designed to look appealing and inviting to children. Just like Captain Mikey, BC was an in-house computer-based production. I was always addicted to the visual style, and that means it's working. The creators knew they wanted to use Macintosh computers to create the style, without coming off as artificial. For the live-action shooting, the host is filmed in front of the blue screen. Footage is sent to Nick Digital, a division of Nickelodeon Animation Studios. Editors bring the footage on a digital file in Media 100 software. For the animation and design, instead of puppets or cells, the creative team uses materials that preschoolers are familiar with. Construction paper, clay, and felt are utilized numerous times. The art department makes miniatures and models by hand. Elements are shot with digital cameras. A digital design team assembles backgrounds in Photoshop, and the characters are animated in After Effects. This process is not only faster, but also flexible, making it easier to make changes when necessary. Dave Palmer set up a library of reusable documents during the pilot, so likely there was less to animate. Using computers meant episodes could be produced faster with lower costs. as opposed to animated shows being sent overseas to Korea. This also gives designers and animators a chance to branch out their creativity. South Park has a similar style, but BC was the first of its kind. The mentality of using materials that children are familiar with reminds me of what Walter Wick does with the I Spy photographs. The overall visual style resembles a storybook. The color schemes of each room were inspired by Johnson's visits to art stores as a child. Steve's iconic green striped shirt was inspired by fruit striped gum. It's so iconic that green stripes would appear frequently.
So the first card is a king of stripes. Ooh, interesting.
Mixing live action and animation is not a new concept. It's been around since the days of Disney. But it's how the show utilizes that mixed media that brings everything together. Whenever the host touches something animated, it becomes real. So I imagine said prop would have to be designed, of course. The creators even believed in spending more money on talented people rather than expensive equipment. I can get behind that. Lastly, let's discuss the format. Every episode starts and ends the same way, inviting the viewers, Blue wants to do something else, playing games while finding clues, a mealtime segment, skidoo scene, thinking time, and recap. A standard but simple formula that preschoolers can follow along or anticipate. Since episodes center around a theme, the games are tied to a single narrative, which makes each episode feel focused. Whereas Sesame Street had individual segments, Blue's Clues was one continuous viewing without commercial breaks, which would probably break the immersion. The Mealtime segments remind me of the live action segments from Arthur, which premiered a month later. Written by the show's script and development team, the children do an activity that relates to the theme of the episode. The letter song was suggested by Santa Miro. Episodes will air 5 consecutive days weekly, since children learn through repetition. Blue's Clues structure is similar to that of Phineas and Ferb, meaning once it's established, the show can play around with this formula. The creators intended for this format to teach kindergarten readiness skills, offer problem solving, participate in activities, and apply those skills in real life. Again, it works pretty well. All these aspects make BC an engaging watch for both children and adults. The name Blue Prince was changed to Blue's Clues because Angela intended for the show to teach mastery. Her thinking was for children to think about the overarching question, and that you're usually given clues to an answer. This teaches children about cognitive development or to use thinking skills, so to speak. Additionally, the notebook was created for the necessity of taking notes in order to remember things. Now if we talked about the history and the pilot of Blue's Clues, let's talk about Blue's Clues itself.
Hey.
I'll be discussing the show season by season. I decided to watch the show in production order, or at least what I believe is production order. Production order simply means the order in which each episode was made, as opposed to broadcast order, which is simply the order of episodes that aired on television. Broadcast and production order can often contradict each other. This is usually the case of episodes being held back by a network for special events, or other episodes aren't completed yet. I chose to watch in production order because it means you get to witness all little nuances or changes as the show goes on. The Archive Nick Jr. website lists the episodes in production, and the Nick Story Archives wiki lists shows in production order based on magazines or newspaper articles. So it's likely they may have checked their sources. Either way, take this information with a dash of salt. Pun intended. After the pilot was shown to Nickelodeon, the creators were told to start production on season 1 immediately, which began in January 1996. BC was slated to premiere in September of that year, with 10 episodes to be completed. The show officially debuted on September 8, 1996, with Snack Time. It also got a sneak peek on Nick at Night on September 3rd. Snack Time is simply a revamp of the 1995 pilot, scene for scene. Another thing the show was consistent with is marketing. TV magazines provide interactive puzzles for families to solve. Interactive kits were sent to educators that include a VHS tape of Snack Time with an introduction from co-creator Angela Santamiro.
We feel really strongly that in order to really talk to the preschool audience, you need to sit on the floor with them. You need to figure out what it is that they're thinking about and what makes them laugh and what is challenging to them.
Overall, season 1 has definite signs of early installment weirdness. Blue acts more dog-like, constantly licking Steve. There are instances where she's seduced by herself. More than one clue is placed on an object. The animation is a bit choppy and static, likely because they didn't have enough animators or a high enough budget. And a few glitches or editing errors would be present. Steve's body would be cut off, the boom mic could be seen, black or white strips were noticeable. I saw a crew member's hand at one point, and some objects are visible on the side before they appear on screen. Of course, if you were watching this show on a standard CRT television, you probably wouldn't see these errors. Steve is very hyper and excited, which will be downplayed as the season progresses.
It's a clue! You know how you can tell it's a clue? Because it's got Blue's paw prints all over it. You know how we can tell it's a clue? Because Blue's paw print is on it.
This was a good call, as it made him easier to be taken seriously. His hyper voice would pop out at times though.
Did you hear what I just said? Our third clue!
Sometimes he would be occasionally snarky, which got a chuckle out of me.
I see a tree.
Oh, yeah, right, a tree.
The play Blue's Clues song is orchestrated differently, with some of the cast making brief appearances. Honestly, I kinda like the original play Blue's Clues song better, mostly for the variety of instruments used. Speaking of the cast, there's Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper, the Shakers, cooks, and adults of the house with French accents.
Hello. This is Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper.
Tickety Tot, a cute alarm clock that has trouble telling time, Shovel and Pail, siblings who spend time outside in the backyard, Slippery Soap, a soap bar that enjoys sliding around, Mailbox, the mailman with a sense of humor, the Felt Friends, two kids made of felt who spend their time in their frame, and Sidetail with Drawer, the one who keeps Steve's notebook, and other necessary items. They're all sentient household objects, kinda like Pee-wee's Playhouse, just less disturbing. Despite being household objects, they personify real people or kids, making them relatable to the target demographic. They're involved in games or activities related to their location. There are 4 more characters I should mention, however. Magenta, Blue's friend from school, who first appeared in Blue's Storytime. She's simply a pink version of Blue. Apparently she got such a positive reception that another episode was made centering her titled Magenta Comes Over. I'm not sure why her leitmotif is a steel drum, but I'm not complaining. And yes, Magenta is a female, not a male.
Hi, Magenta.
She says hi.
There's Sock Puppet, a self-explanatory puppet Steve made that would reappear in future episodes, mostly for a quick gag. There's also the Snail. This pink snail will be hidden 3 times in an episode, a la Where's Waldo? This is a challenge to pay close attention. Another goal intended was, the more you look, the more you see. Sometimes the snail will be doing something random, like using a paint contraption, or appearing as a giant. The snail will be pointed out by characters. Other times it would be cleverly hidden. But the strangest thing about the snail is, despite it being female, as stated by the characters, it has a surprisingly masculine voice. That snail is quite a mystery. And finally, the paw print that Blue places at the beginning of each episode is kind of the character itself. The ways the paw prints are removed also relate to the episode's theme, through cleaning, interacting, or whatever this is.
This. Did you do that?
Before I forget, I should mention Blue's Clues has probably one of the most original soundtracks I've ever heard in a children's show. The score was composed by Nick Balaban and Michael Rubin, a pair of New York-based musicians. Like everything else, the music had to be organic and natural, so Balaban and Rubin brought in and recorded live musicians. The pair were also passionate about exposing varieties of music to children. The music covers different genres, ranging from country to disco to reggae. The most common genre I hear is jazz, especially in the later seasons, a genre that was popularized by Peanuts and Hey Arnold. So many instruments are utilized. Of course, typical instruments like guitars and trumpets can be heard, but there's also unique ones like ukuleles, vibraphones, congas, oboes, mandolins, and crumb horns. From my hearing, the show sure loves steel guitars. The instrument was used for the opening, hand gestures, and the skidoo sound effect. The songs, on the other hand, leave a lot to be desired. Most of them were classic children's songs, or nursery rhymes. The credits were played instrument or melody that was heard throughout the episode, a neat touch that ties everything together. The credits only have Blue peeking out from the screen, with the first alternate version being Magenta Comes Over. The opening credits would feature a yellow book on top of other well-known children's books. BC was layered not just in educational value, but also subtlety. The frames, tables, refrigerator, and bulletin board are all decorated with things that correlate to the episode's theme, and the 12 antiquity is an icon also related to the episode. It's a nice attention to detail. There are a few subtle nods to media that will fly over the heads of children, such as Steve reciting a lyric from the song The Lion Sleeps Tonight, or a lyric of My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. Most of the episode's questions are directed towards Blue, but also the other characters, such as Mailbox's favorite party game or Tiki's favorite nursery rhyme. Another aspect that makes the show a rarity is its voice cast. The adult characters, both recurring and one-offs, are voiced by the crew members. Nick Bellman and Michael Rubin voiced Mr. Salt and Mailbox respectively. Mrs. Pepper was voiced by producer Penelope Jukes for the first season. Angela Santamiro voiced Mama Bear in Blue's Storytime, and Coily Chana, episode director and coordinator, voices Magenta. The kid characters, however, are voiced by actual kids, which I like. I always prefer this mentality because it makes the characters' performances feel more genuine. Preschool voiceovers would be used to invite the kids at home to play along. There are 3 kids I want to spotlight for the moment. Alicia Allen, the voice of Sidetail Drawer, made an appearance in the video letter for Adventures in Art and would go on to star in 2 movies starring Ice Cube. Catherine Avery, the original voice of Tickety, also voiced one of the Felt Friends, the Triangle one, and provided this voiceover that would be recycled throughout seasons 1 and 2.
No, it's a clue.
And Cody Ross Pitts, the original voice of Slippery Soap. He has such a recognizable voice that I can instantly tell it's him.
I'm practicing and I need my grandmother. I think she can help me.
Including Freddy, the square-shaped Felt Friend. Most of the other characters are either recurring or one-offs. One thing that always distracted me was how Steve's hair fluctuates between shots. As far as I know, this is likely due to some footage either being recycled or it was reshot at a later date. There's a scene in Blue's News where Steve's hair is in the style of early season 2, so it's possible that scene was reshot during that season's production. Additionally, whenever Steve draws the clue, it's actually not him. The footage scene is someone else's hand drawing, while Steve likely narrates over a voiceover. He even admits it himself.
I gotta level with you. I did not draw the clues. It's too hard. We had to have like professional illustrators and animators in there.
I believe this is what the creds refer as ham model. A running gag with Steve is that whenever the viewers yell out clue, he mishears at something else like shoe, through, or zoo, or he'll just flat out miss the point. One has to wonder if he does it on purpose, just for giggles. Another running gag of our Green Stripe host is that he'll do these weird impressions or accents, ranging from a jungle explorer to a British window washer. I imagine he liked to improvise during shooting. The best one has to be where Steve pretends to be Elvis, spelling out several references under his name.
The king has left the forest.
You can tell Steve had a blast with his performance. This episode also has one of my favorite jokes in the series.
Thanks, but I'm not a wolf. I'm a nice old grandmother.
Oh, yeah? Well, those are awful big feet you got for a grandmother.
BC is genuinely humorous at times. You could argue the jokes are played pretty straight, but it's how the actors sell a performance that adds to the enjoyment. What's funny is during thinking time, when Steve sits in a thinking chair trying to put all 3 clues together, he often gives out the wrong answer. And some of these are the most nonsensical answers I've ever heard. The funniest one to me was a shadow dancing feather from What Is Blue Afraid Of? The way he slightly realizes that's wrong, and the blunt child voiceover is just hilarious. But in all seriousness, this also teaches preschoolers that it's okay to be wrong, as well as to use more brainpower or critical thinking. While finding its footing, season 1 had a few standout moments. Steve plays his guitar for the first time in Blue's favorite song, he juggles for the first time in the Trying Game, A Snowy Day is the first winter-themed episode, What Is Blue Afraid Of is a Halloween-type episode with its nightmare fuel painting. Beginning with What Does Blue Want to Make, the Play Blue's Clues song was altered, and What Time Is It for Blue has a tiny self-aware gag in the story Steve reads. In my opinion, the season doesn't get noteworthy until the finale, Blue's News. This was the last episode produced for season 1, and my personal favorite of the season as well. The episode is structured like a domino effect, where everywhere Steve goes leads to another location and another clue. The highlight for me is the scene where Steve cadoos in the chalk world. No, not chalk zone. That doesn't make this video funny though, but the ending is what makes the whole episode. The introduction of Baby Paprika. When looking back, it was foreshadowed early on with Mr. Salt mumbling spice names to himself, and Mrs. Pepper being nowhere in sight. Almost every main cast member makes an appearance, and I mean every character, and it changes the rest of the show going forward. Every season when something changes, like a new character or location, it stays that way for the rest of the show. Blue's News kind of set a precedent for status quo changes. Not many children's shows that I know of do this. Another close favorite of mine is What Is Blue Afraid Of? An episode that simply teaches children to face their fears. It's something that everyone has to face, even adults, and I feel that's what makes this show so relatable. When it comes to BC, there isn't an episode I really despise. At worst, an episode is just bland or forgettable. My least favorite episode of the season is probably Mailbox's birthday, simply for how sluggish the story moves. This is the first birthday related episode, revealing Mailbox is 10 years old. The slow pacing is intentional for children to respond in time, but I feel like this one drags out with a few awkward scenes. The pacing issue might be attributed to mail time happening at the end of the episode, which would also happen in later seasons. Season 1 might be one of the weaker seasons, but that's usually the case for the first season of any show. Rough around the edges. Otherwise, the show pretty much hit it out of the park. BC's premiere was one of Nickelodeon's highest rated premieres for young audiences, getting tons of press and media reviews from critics, and surpassing ratings of Sesame Street and Barney and Friends. The show was on its way to become a phenomenon.
You seeing what I'm seeing here with talking popsicle sticks? Cool.
Season 2 began airing in November 1997, just a month after recent Season 1 airings, with the episode Steve Gets the Sniffles. Well, that's one way to start a season. Production on Season 2, I believe, may have begun around early 1997. Two directors began working on the show in that same year, but that's just a guess. Season 2 introduces aspects that would stick for the rest of the show. Steve and Sidetail now have a conversation, giving her more of a presence, and Mrs. Pepper now has a proper voice actress, Spencer Caden. Other characters appear in the credits besides Blue, including ones that appear in said episode. The credits themselves will be customized for special occasions. The original airing of What Does Blue Want to Do with Her Picture features mailbox encouraging viewers to send emails to their website, and What Did Blue See has Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper asking viewers to identify photos. The race to the thinking chair score is introduced in Blue's senses, and the opening would have some variations like other things happening in the background. The video layers will mix animation and live action, or have kids giving something to the host from inside the letter. The Recycle episode is the first mail time segment to be filmed in a real location, specifically the Do Donne Paper Mill, an arts organization in New York. Season 2 sees the end of trends from Season 1. The episode's title is no longer the question Steve asks Blue, the kids don't sing along to the So Long tune, and Steve no longer gives out the wrong answer, except for a few more instances later on. The Recycle episode marks the first time where Steve doesn't give out a wrong answer, although you could argue that it first happened in Adventures in Art. What experiment does Blue want to try is where I think the show began to find its groove, and serves as one of my favorites of the season. The episode centers around experimenting in science. The songs see major improvements at this point, not just musically, but also lyric-wise. The Planet song describes each characteristic of the solar system, including Pluto. Yeah, this is back when Pluto was a planet. This was done because research indicated preschoolers wanted to know more about the solar system. Steve mentioned that while doing this, he messed up several times due to being hung in harnesses. Regardless, the Planet song would become an iconic number of the series. This is also where the show would adopt mnemonics. Mnemonics are devices or ways to remember things. Schoolhouse Rock has a similar teaching method with their songs about grammar or history. BC would often use mantras or ditties for everyday tasks, adding to the repetition quota. The experiment episodes where the show began to delve into more complex topics, such as music, physics, and perspectives. Oh yeah, and this will be the focus of 2 episodes. Blue's frustration centers around an issue that not just children face, but even adults face. The episode does a great job illustrating how to deal with frustration in certain situations, with a simple mantra.
Hey, when you get frustrated, what do? Stop, breathe,
and think.
It's also pretty amusing to see characters who are usually so chipper get so agitated.
Oh, that is really frustrating when it just...
The other emotion-based episode is Blue's Sad Day, where Blue is... This episode demonstrates discussing feelings and the right way to solve conflicts. Blue's Sad Day is widely disliked, and by widely I mean... Phantom Strider listed this as one of his worst episodes, and there's a review of the episode on IMDb that criticizes the moral presented. This episode introduces Blue's school and schoolmates, who would appear in later episodes. One in particular is an orange kitten. Seeing as how Blue was originally conceived as an orange cat, I wonder if this character was based off that idea. Green Puppy makes her introduction as a somewhat rude puppy who loves knocking down blocks. Side note, I love that both the drawing Blue made and the Clue version of Green Puppy are both depicted as monsters. After Green Puppy apologizes, she and Blue play with blocks, only for Green Puppy to knock it down again. Blue tells Green Puppy how she feels, but Green knocks it down anyway. Blue solves the conflict by giving her own blocks to play with. On the one hand, this does serve as a decent lesson about compromise, but on the other hand, you're basically allowing someone to have their way, which can send a harmful message for youngsters. If I had to say what my least favorite episode of season 2 is, it'd probably be this one. By the way, Green Puppy is also a female, despite her low-pitched barks. She's voiced by creator of Wally Kazam, Adam Peltzman, who joined the season as a writer and script coordinator. More recurring characters are introduced this season, including the Sun, who fittingly wears star-shaped sunglasses, and Gopher, a mischievous gopher that pops up occasionally.
Come on, Steve. We're following that gopher.
Season 2 leans further into pop culture references. Season 1 had a few of these here and there, but Season 2 takes it a step further. Steve and Sightail share a version of the Anvil chorus in the Rainy Day episode. There's a nod to a Bob Dylan song, Blowing in the Wind. The frame in Balloon's Frustrated references the fable The Fox and the Grapes, and the character of Tink is named after Tinker Toys. I never realized that before until just recently. The strangest reference I couldn't recognize was this scene from What Was Blue's Dream About. It features a felt friend running in a race, with cinematic piano music playing. After doing some research, I believe this may be referencing the main theme from the British documentary Chariots of Fire. Speaking of dreams, there's a scene during the intro where Steve recounts a dream he had about playing in front of an audience, which happened to him in real life. Apparently, Blue's Clues can also predict the future. Hear that, Simpsons?
And they don't have a Blue's Clue. Whoops, gotta age it up.
The funniest occurrence this season is a running gag where Steve picks up the wrong object instead of his notebook.
You know what we need? Our handy dandy new crayon. And our notebook too.
At this point, the show has improved not just in topics, but also visually. The animation is a bit smoother, the colors are more saturated, and the backgrounds have more detail, texture, and variety. Blue's sentence marks the first time we skidoo into the computer, which makes the Macintosh startup sound, proving how dated the show is. Steve's voice is muffled like he's inside the computer. The weird thing is, in subsequent episodes where skidoo takes place in the computer, they remove the voice effect.
It's another sound note. Okay, I know what to do. We need a hint. What can you see from where you are?
Maybe they felt it was too distracting. Blue's Clues in my opinion still holds up well, but is also dated in some areas. Specifically, the aforementioned Pluto, and especially technology. Tape cassettes and recorders would be used occasionally. As for standout episodes, What Is Blue Trying to Do is a great episode that encourages positive thinking and being proud of your work. Plus, it's funny to see that can is Steve's trigger word, and then he says it. What Did Blue See is another highlight for me. We see unique angles and shots around the house that hadn't been attempted before, like inside side table drawer, or a water refraction with the vase. The season finale Mechanics is clever in its name. Mechanics are people who fix things, and mechanics refer to how something functions. Both are explored in this episode, so the name has double meaning. The episode itself is kinda typical, but it further proves the show's subtlety. There are details sprinkled throughout each episode that surprised me upon rewatch. Like the scene in Math, where Steve walks out of the kitchen. The map displays numbers as Steve says them aloud, while blackbirds appear on a tree as Steve counts up to 12. All this was animated in just one scene. Another example is the Recycle episode, where the bins each make sounds of their respective materials. Blue's Surprise at 2 o'clock is a time-based episode, where events are timed by a watch. I even paid attention to both the watch and episode runtime, and while they don't sync up perfectly, it's a decent attempt. A child may not notice these details at first, but a few more viewings might catch their attention. Once again, the more you look, the more you see. The big event this season is, without doubt, Blue's birthday, airing on June 14, 1998, marking the first primetime special of the show. This was another turning point in the show for me. The notebook has a theme variation, and Steve sings the full Play Blue's Clues song, which would become the norm beginning season 3 and onward. A few other episodes this season would have this version, and brass instruments are also added to the orchestration. The episode was marketed heavily. The idea was to focus on a big event for preschoolers' lives, and a birthday party hits the nail on the head. There are 2 scenes that are only exclusive to the VHS, released on September 1998. First off, Steve being taught the birthday carol dance from these 3 kids. I'm not sure when this was filmed, but possibly in mid-1998, around the same time the commercials for this episode were running. It also features a talking clock Timely, who was never brought up again. Several one-offs got Blink and You'll Miss It cameos, but nothing for Timely. Not even a mention by Tickety. The next scene is when Steve tries to find Blue and ends up opening presents in the sale of Russian dolls. This also has what I think is the funniest preschool voiceover.
You'll never guess what this is. Go ahead, guess.
A toaster.
The Mailtime segment features the first time guest stars appeared. These including Gloria Estefan, Tia and Tamara Mowry, Michelle Trachtenberg, Amanda Bynes, and Rosie O'Donnell. Other guest stars such as Whoopi Goldberg and Melissa Joan Hart are only exclusive to the UK version of this episode. As for the episode itself, it's where the heartwarming aspects I feel shine through the center. This shows Steve and Blue's relationship at the core. Blue's gift from Steve is a turtle named Turquoise, who will make background appearances later in the season. The special even got big name sponsors, an FAO Schwartz birthday event, a 6.9 national rating outperforming Touched by an Angel, sweepstakes and customized parties, and tons of press coverage. Blue's birthday set a precedent for Nickelodeon's promotional gigs, so needless to say, it was successful. By the way, Steve talking to Timely will become relevant later in this review. I'll explain why soon. Overall, I feel season 2 may have affected me the most, seeing as how many of the things I own were because of this season. I own a Kaleidoscope and a Dreamcatcher, I have my own Cyclone experiment, I still take the advice of episodes such as the Lost episode for losing things, and Blue is frustrated for handling frustration, and I think that's what makes season 2 my favorite season. It's memorable, not just because of its content, but because it marked the point where the show was heading in the right direction. After tons of emails and letters of praise from parents, as well as big time press, the show will only skyrocket in popularity even more. How you like them apples?
Ho ho! That's some mighty fine figuring.
We need you to make the salad while we finish the sandwiches.
Us?
Yes, you're our only hope.
Your only hope? But we don't know.
And thus, we arrived at season 3, the point where you couldn't escape the blue puppy. Got milk ads, a Foxtrot comic strip, tons of merchandise. Yeah, long story short, Blue was popular. As far as I know, production on season 3 may have begun in mid-late 1998, based off this newspaper that advertised BC and King & Cal. The Humongous games, which I'll talk about later, have Steve with shorter hair, so maybe production on the 3rd season began around that time. What I am sure of is that this is a great season. Season 3 further builds on the trends that were introduced in season 2. The backyard and neighborhood are expanded upon, we get to see more buildings and locations, including Magenta's house, which kinda has an M-shaped roof. Wonder if that was intentional. The notebook would get even more variations based on the theme, whether it's decoration or just a random sound effect.
Okay.
The opening would have more variants as well, depending on the plot or weather. Steve and Blue wouldn't always be present in the intro until after the camera trucks in. The credits would be stylized, such as playing an instrumental from the episode or having a different background. Characters like Shovel, Pail, and Mailbox appear frequently, as well as other characters that appear in the episode. This happened in previous seasons, but it's more common after season 3. At this point, the formula is refined enough that the show can play around with it more. What's That Sound is a personal favorite of mine for those reasons, mainly the change of pace. Since the episode is about listening to sounds, most of the background music is muted. This is the first episode to take place during the fall, which was featured a couple of times this season. As someone whose favorite season is fall, the setting looks quite nice. The highlight of the episode is the black and white movie skidoo, where Steve and Blue become Foley artists by putting the sound effects back in the movie. The movie is animated in the style of old Disney or Fleischer cartoons, showing versatility in animation style. It helps that there's a self-aware gag of Steve questioning Blue's paw print on a cloud.
How did Blue get a paw?
Figuring out how Blue is able to place a paw print in these things is like questioning how everyone is able to skidoo in books or frames. You kinda just roll with it. At this point, I could tell the crew were becoming self-aware of their show, occasionally breaking the fourth wall. That's what I love about this show. It isn't afraid to poke fun at itself. Meta humor, if you will.
We are looking for clues now. This is the part where we sing about the clues.
Blue's collection demonstrates why Steve always puts the letter down after watching it. It's because he has a collection box full of letters from previous episodes. It's both heartwarming and also just feels like the creators wanted to explain where the letters go. The most blatant example of meta humor is the episode Inventions, where the answer to Blue's Clues is Blue's Clues itself. It's revealed that Blue invented the game, which will be explained later on. Another change of pace is nature. The entirety of the episode occurs outside, where Steve, Blue, and the others experience the wonders of nature. BC is a show that encourages preschoolers to explore the world around them, and this episode exemplifies that greatly. The show has also improved in its digital design. Season 2 had a few ambitious backgrounds, but Season 3 kicks it up a notch by including more textures, character designs, and changes in art style. And that extends to the art and animation department. The animators are getting comfortable with the characters, with more fluid movements and expressions. Steve has new outfits, most of which are variants of his green stripes, including an alien costume for a Halloween special that looks suspiciously similar to Frey's alien costume from Magenta Comes Over. The funniest outfit has to be the wrong shirt, where he wears opposite clothes and didn't notice until the viewers pointed it out.
Nice pants.
Thanks.
What always stood out to me about his wardrobe were the tan sneakers. Usually he wears dark brown shoes, but there are instances where he wears tan sneakers. Apparently, these were in the first few episodes produced for Season 3. I'm not sure why this was the case. Maybe the creators wanted to experiment with his look? Anyway, speaking of production, the first produced entry of Season 3 was Art Appreciation, which features the gang having an art show in the backyard. The episode does a better job discussing art than Adventures in Art. Instead of focusing on shapes and colors, they discuss art techniques and reference real-life paintings.
Oriental Promenade by Paul Klee.
Art professor Joyce Raimondo was a consultant on the episode and makes an appearance in the video letter, which takes place at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, featuring the sculpture Man in the Open Air. Special guest stars became more common after Season 3. Some voice characters and others appear in person. The most influential guest was probably Marley Matlin, who plays the deaf librarian Marley in Nick Jr.'s segment.
Green. Orange.
BBC was one of the first children's shows to prominently feature sign language. Ever since the episode Signs, sign language was incorporated into the show's language, even when Joe became the host. I just found out she did sign language for a Billy Joel song in Sesame Street, so that's pretty neat. The same, however, cannot be said for late blues singer Phoebe Snow, who voices Leigh Bassett in probably my least favorite episode of Season 3, Hide and Seek. The blues section overshadows the hide and seek aspect in such a jarring way. Phoebe Snow doesn't speak enough to leave an impact either. The show continues to discuss more advanced topics like jobs, inventions, the human body, animals, and the water cycle. The latter episode, titled Stormy Weather, got BBC a Peabody Award, and rightfully so. The episode does a great job illustrating how to describe the weather and has a musical number about the process of rain. It's up there with the Plan song, and I'll never forget my alphabet as one of my favorite songs. Fun fact, this episode was penned by Chris Sneed, creator of McStuffins. I also like to give a shout out to Blues Play, the Season 3 episode, not the Season 1 episode. It's sort of another emotion-centric episode, but my favorite part of the episode was the skidoo, where we learn the cause of the hippo running down the hill to the farm animals. It's revealed that the hippo turned her back out of shyness, and ran down the hill because she felt the farm animals were making fun of her. It does a great job demonstrating that there's more to the story than meets the eye. Something I think everyone needs to learn nowadays, especially as a reviewer. From this point on, I like to highlight the other big events this season. The season premiere with Blue's Big Treasure Hunt, where Steve and Blue go around the house solving riddles and obtaining items, leading up to a magical world called the Land of Great Discovery.
Now this is something else.
This episode introduces Steve's grandma, played by Rue McClanahan, former Golden Girl, who will be mentioned throughout this season as well. She even wears a dress in the same aesthetic as Steve. Thank you, Rue, for being a friend. The season has Thanksgiving and Halloween specials, with most notably a holiday special. Blue's Big Holiday, the show's second winter-themed adventure, features Blue's schoolmates and their owners, including Winona Judd and Tyrese Gibson. The show celebrates holiday traditions and differences, praising how said differences make these toys unique, which is another great lesson for the target demographic.
I think your dress is wonderfully different. Unique, in fact.
BBC is one of the few shows that covers the three main holidays, plus Kwanzaa. I recommend watching this episode every year as a tradition in itself. What's So Funny is more of an April Fool's Day episode, even though it aired in October 2000. Everyone is self-aware of how nonsensical and silly everything is. Sock Puppet returns in a cameo after a season and a half.
Tick tock.
You said it, Tickety. Everybody's a comedian.
Blue's Big Pajama Party takes place during nighttime, complete with a bedtime feel and a quiet keyboard variation of the intro music and theme song. Whenever I see lightning bugs outside, I'm always reminded of that episode, so Pajama Party had an impact on me. This was the most successful primetime special, airing on October 10th, 1999, with Julia Louis-Dreyfus making an appearance. These aren't deleted scenes, but more so scenes that are exclusive to this airing. Makes me curious as to what else was left on the cutting room floor.
There they are! Bunny left and bunny right.
How have you been, my fuzzy friends? You look well.
The most noteworthy introduction is Periwinkle, a cat that moved from the city into the neighborhood, who becomes Stephen Blue's next door neighbor. He's voiced by Karen Bowen, who also voiced Bob the Ball from HBO's A Little Curious. I like how in Blue's Big Mystery, his moving in is foreshadowed in a subtle manner, giving the children a chance to put two and two together. BC usually introduces new additions by foreshadowing or build-up. Periwinkle is relatable to the children who know the hardships of moving into a new town, having to leave old friends but making new ones. He makes a small number of appearances afterwards, but eventually becomes integrated in the main cast. I can't forget his most iconic, epic catchphrase.
Mary Pocus Hocus Crocus!
Amazing.
The big music show is today, and I overslept. There's so much to do. We have to build a stage, we have to make snacks, we have to make costumes, we gotta rehearse. I don't think I'm gonna get everything done in time. Unless I have your help.
Without a doubt, the biggest event this season was Blue's Big Musical, a 1-hour TV movie released on video in October 2000. Sees the gang putting on a musical show for their neighbors. It got a special premiere at Paramount Studios, with many celebrities attending. There were a few albums released under the Kid Rhino label, who also released a few other albums for children's series. A good chunk of jazz numbers can be heard, giving me a Vince Guaraldi vibe, and the musical is no exception. I'd say these songs are some of the best hits the show has ever produced. In general, the songs this season have much more variety in sound, and give the cast more time to shine. The Skidoo scene showcases the increase in quality of the show's soundtrack, featuring more musical mnemonics about the elements of a song, with the help of the vocal group The Persuasions and voice of G-Clef, the late Ray Charles. He had a cameo in the 80s film The Blues Brothers, and now I'm imagining a parody titled The Blues Clues Brothers, starring Steve and Joe. On a side note, there's a scene where Steve steps on a piano, which may or may not be a nod to Big. Given how the show does references, I wouldn't be surprised. Shovel, Pale, and Tickety all have new voice actors, while Slippery has an actor for his singing parts. This also marks the last use of Catherine Avery's voiceover from Adventures in Art.
No, it's a clue!
Periwinkle gets a co-starring role, focusing on his interest for magic, which will be a recurring hobby for him as the show progresses. Sidetail draws more involved in activities this season, which is a central theme in his movie. In the beginning, Sidetail was mostly a minor character, so here, she's shown to be very shy, which makes her coming out of her shell side story relatable to the target demographic. I always appreciate the amount of callbacks and continuity of the show, in the form of pictures or characters, and the audience in the musical is no exception. This implies that the show is on a moving timeline, and it's a testament to how many episodes the show has cranked out. The movie was Todd Kessler's last contribution to the show, as he left sometime in 2000. In a New York Times article published in that same year, he mentioned how he simply felt it was time to move on, which would be a sign of things to come. His next big project would be Keep, a 2006 drama film starring Jesse McCartney. If Blue's Big Musical was produced towards the end of season 3, it would have served as a fitting finale. For the longest time though, I always thought Magenta Gets Glasses fit that position. Magenta receives glasses after having poor vision. This marks the second and final appearance of her owner, Miranda, played by Shannon Walker Williams. She first appeared in Shy, another highlight that covers an issue that both children and adults face. Magenta Gets Glasses demonstrates how getting glasses for someone might feel awkward at first, but having better eyesight is what's important in the long run. This moral is greatly emphasized by the musical segment for Mail Time, another low-key banger that sadly doesn't last very long. Miranda also doesn't appear after this episode. Maybe her actress wasn't available for the rest of the show, but who knows. This episode always felt like a finale to me since it changes the status quo in a big way, but apparently it's the first episode of season 4 produced, if this list is anything to go by. If that's the case, then so be it. Stephen Burns was rumored to have died around this point. This circumvented around the internet for a while, to the point where Steve appeared on the Rosie O'Donnell show to disprove these claims. Santa Miro, if you can believe it, was excited to hear these rumors, because that was another sign the show was becoming a phenomenon. You know your show is popular when rumors about an actor go public. The point is, the show had garnered a huge reputation for the most popular children's program. So much so, it was even included as part of the regular Nickelodeon brand. pumping out tons of merchandise including food, toys, Nick Jr. magazines, and books, written and illustrated by the show's crew members. A rule of thumb is that the merchandise had to stay true to the show's brand, meaning it had to include the same learning curve as the show. The creators were heavily involved in each product to make sure they stayed true to BC and avoid the BC name from just being slapped on. I still hold Season 2 as my favorite, but Season 3 was certainly the peak of the show. Everything about the show's educational structure was refined to perfection, but Season 4 would see major changes. And I mean major.
Good afternoon.
Yo.
As I alluded to before, Blue's Clues cranked out tons of merchandise, and that includes CD-ROMs. Developed by Humongous Entertainment, the same company that produced Putt Putt, Freddy Fish, Pajama Sam, and Spy Fox. BC had a few licensed games such as Blue's Alphabet Book on a Game Boy, and Blue's Big Musical on a PlayStation. There were even some Flash games on the Nick Jr. website based on episodes, but the Humongous games are definitely the most memorable to some. Nickelodeon and HE made a 5-year deal on September 24, 1997 to produce CDs based on Blue's Clues. This led to the creation of 6 games, released from 1998 to 2000. Just like other merch, they had to follow the show's brand. Seeing as how BC was written as an interactive game show, and Humongous' games focused on players interacting with the world, this is a match made in heaven. I used the VirtualBox program to play them just as I did for the I Spy games for my I Spy review. Fun fact, these games were my first introduction to playing on the computer, so I have a personal connection with them. I'll be discussing them in no particular order, starting with Blue's Birthday, released in September 1998. The game, as you can figure, is based off the Season 2 birthday episode. The game is split into 4 different chapters, 2 adventures on 2 discs, which include helping Steve and Blue prepare for the party by figuring out what food she wants to eat or what game she wants to play. They pretty much play out like typical episodes. HE got the structure down to a T, and that's not the only thing achieved. The art direction is faithfully recreated from the kitchen to the bedroom. The HE creative team and BC creators consulted on level and game design. After all, if you're planning on transitioning a show into a game, might as well get the creators involved. The composers were involved in the game as well, meaning music from the show is heard, albeit compressed. It wouldn't be a Humongous Entertainment game without click points. They're practically a trademark of HE. You help characters out with their problems in order to find clues, just like in the show. However, there are optional minigames to play, such as baking a cake or making a card. These aren't necessary to complete the game though. The only things exclusive to the game are Birthday Land, which is self-explanatory, and a side quest that involves finding party favors. They also do nothing. The funniest parts of the game were probably the small parts, like how you can trick Steve into heading for the thinking chair.
Ooh, time to think. We don't have all 3 clues yet. Nope. Not gonna fall for that again.
The stranger parts of the game involved the voice actors. Almost all of the cast reprised their roles, with the exception of Tickety and Mailbox.
I can't tell you that. Then it wouldn't be a surprise. Uh-oh, my birthday present for Blue isn't ready. It's a puzzle.
It's one of those we couldn't get the original VA, so here's a satellite in hopes no one will notice issues. A few technical drawbacks were present, such as scanlines on Steve's footage, or sometimes the audio would be out of sync with the music. Maybe this was due to limited hardware at the time, but I'm not a tech expert. The ending of each chapter has the gang playing activities depending on the answer to Blue's Clues, ranging from making pizzas, coloring books, or puppet shows. You get rewarded with a certificate for helping out with the party, adding to the empowerment aspect of the show. Unfortunately, because I was playing on a virtual machine, I couldn't print this out. So that stinks. The parts that caught my attention were the little Easter eggs and references to the show, such as the matching hat chicks from Snack Time or the mixed up instruments from Blue's favorite song. The Thinking Time segments include wrong answers, a nod to the ones Steve would give in the early episodes. I'm kind of a Blue's Clues nerd, or certified Blue's Clues expert. Okay, maybe not certified. If I had to guess when this game was produced, I'd say maybe somewhere in the middle of 1998, around the time commercials for Blue's Birthday were airing. Nevertheless, Blue's Birthday was certainly a blast from the past. I imagine any kid who's in a Blue's Clues phase must have had a blast as well. Next up is Blue's Treasure Hunt, also based on an episode of the show. Instead of Steve's grandma, a treasure bug sends out the treasure hunt for Steve and Blue to journey on. Just like the previous entry, the game is split into 2 discs. This game is a substantial improvement over the previous entry. The world is more expansive, with familiar faces to boot, the minigames and tasks are necessary for the adventure, and the video footage on Steve is a bit cleaner. The narrative follows the same beats as the episode. You have to find the favorite treasure of the BC cast, and each time you get a key, bringing you closer to the land of great discovery. At the end, the player is rewarded with said land, which is essentially a sandbox mode. You can decorate the place with stickers and play this breakout style video game. This game has a few exclusive locations too, such as an extra room in the kitchen, and I wonder if that inspired the extra room shown in Season 4. The other 4 games are all activity based, meaning they all center around a theme, and Blue's Clues is never played. Blue herself is the main focus, while Steve goes off doing something else. Blue's ABC time activities has Blue finding words for her word book, 1, 2, 3 time activities has her playing games in a backyard fair to win a prize, art time activities has her collecting art pieces for the art show, and reading time activities has her finding stories for Cash Register's newspaper stand. 1, 2, 3 time activities is about math, art time activities is about art, and both ABC time and reading time are about reading. These games to me are kind of hit or miss. Probably the biggest draw for me is how repetitive the tasks can get. By repetitive, I mean once you play for a good chunk of time, it starts to get old. The activities don't really seem to get progressively harder as you advance. Granted, children may eventually master these skills, but when I was young, I eventually got tired at some point. That said, there are little things I appreciate. The plot of Art Time feels like a mix of art appreciation and draw along with Blue. Chalk Girl and Marky Marker from the latter episode even appear in this game. Whenever you stop playing ABC Time, Steve makes references to Humongous Entertainment's other mainline games.
And the little car saved all the animals at the zoo. The mystery. All right, fish. No longer afraid of the dark. Good for him.
Humongous was always cheeky when it came to Easter eggs. 1, 2, 3 Time has little nods to episodes, such as Cash Register from Math, the Mother May I game from What Game Does Blue Want to Learn, and Tink from What Does Blue Want to Build. A strategy I used was writing down and calculating how much the parts cost, and figuring out how many games I would have to play. These games also teach children about other things, such as umbrella birds, which look nothing like how they look in the game, and portfolios, for children who might want to be artists. The activities I got the most addicted to were the card games from 1, 2, 3 Time and Reading Time. For some reason, I kept getting anxious to win. Guess these games bring out my competitive side. Periwinkle appears in Reading Time and Art Time, which were both released in March 2000, despite him not appearing until Blue's Big Mystery, which aired in September 2000. Perhaps the episode had finished production around this time. Like I said before, I eventually lost interest the more I played through these games, so I never bothered to complete them all. So here's what I missed. This screenshot shows how many prizes you can win in 1, 2, 3 Time, and here's what happens when you complete all 45 newspapers in Reading Time. Yes, 45.
You really did an amazing job. 45 newspapers. You did it. The whole picture is there. And look, it's a picture of Reporter Blue.
Overall, the Humongous Entertainment games had some minor drawbacks, but otherwise, these were a fun collection of games. Playing them takes me back to my childhood. AG was able to translate the show's format and educational structure onto the computer flawlessly. Blue's Birthday and Blue's Treasure Hunt were like handheld versions of the show. 1, 2, 3 Time activities and Art Time activities were some of my personal favorites. If you want to relive some old memories, I recommend VirtualBox and downloading some of the ISO files from the Internet Archive. This was peak nostalgia for me, aside from a few other games I used to play. Now let's get on with the rest of the show.
We want a paper bag. Cool!
By the time Season 4 rolled out, Blue's Clues was already widespread, joining the ranks of Oswald and Lil Bill, to name a few. I think the season might have begun production around early to mid 2000. The backstage at Blue's Clues video has Steve in his superhero outfit from Super Friends. After 3 seasons, the show's opening has finally been changed. It's customary for a show to update its intro sequence after a few episodes or so, to reflect status quo changes. In this case, Periwinkle from next door and Magenta wearing glasses appear, and Steve's footage is redone, so his season 1 voice doesn't come off as jarring. The season began premiering with episodes centering around imagination. Imagination has a subplot about Mr. Saul finding his imagination. Adventure is a medieval fantasy journey to save Horace. Steve's Stuffed Anteater. The Anything Box does the plot of Idiot Box a year prior. And Super Friends is about the gang becoming superheroes, or as they call it,
the Thinking Squad.
So this is where Samuel got the idea for Super Y. Probably not. These episodes see Tickety, Shovel, Pale, Slippery, Periwinkle, and Paprika all receive new voice actors, 2 of which had already voiced Shovel and Tickety in Blue's big musical. They took a while to get used to, but otherwise I had a little issue with them. Although I will always prefer the cast of the first 3 seasons. This means that Alicia Allen is the only kid VA who remained for nearly the entire run. It's kind of the end of an era. Season 4 also sees the end of Saiteo's iconic catchphrase and a few pop culture references. The last one that stands out to me is a kitchen game in the style of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
We think it's the apple.
The apple. Is that your final answer?
In general, this season wasn't as memorable to me as previous seasons. Everything just felt underwhelming. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it. Nobody stood out to me as much as prior episodes did. There are some bright spots here and there though. A good chunk of episodes follow up on previous storylines. Block centers around Green Puppy's love for knocking down blocks, and David Plum is a sequel to Periwinkle Misses His Friend, where Plum comes for a visit. The latter episode demonstrates the Spanish language. Un con dia Plum translates roughly to a David Plum. I checked some Spanish dictionary websites to see if the language was accurate, and it was, so kudos goes to the consultant team. I took some Spanish myself during my undergraduate college years. It's worth noting that Dora the Explorer, which premiered a year prior, also taught a good chunk of Spanish language. To say this episode is trying to compete with Dora, I don't think so. If anything, this episode feels more inspired by it. Plus, it's not out of the show's reach to educate youngsters about a new language.
Abierta. Cerrada.
Now would be a good time to talk about the show's international versions. I wasn't sure where to talk about this, so here it is. BC has had a few versions distributed to other countries around the world: United Kingdom, Korea, and Portugal, which is dubbed in Spanish. These aren't bad, but the editing has room for improvement. The creators always strive to extend the learning values or keep the show fresh, and this is done by introducing new characters. This transitions into the only thing that does stand out about this season: story arcs. These signify the huge changes I was referring to before. Ironically, both arcs involve brothers. The first of these is about Cinnamon, Paprika's baby brother. This airs as a 5-part event in late 2001, in which I'll discuss each part individually. Alright, fact check. When I said I watched the show in production order, I was mostly telling the truth. I watched some episodes in the context of the story's progression, or in other words, the order they were broadcast. Part 1, What's New Blue, has Stephen Blue starting their own newspaper, titled Blue's News, not to be confused with the season 1 finale of the same name. Actually, that episode has more in common with this one. Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper announce that Mrs. Pepper will be pregnant with another baby, to which everyone reacts with surprise. As such, everyone prepares for the new sibling. Part 2, Blue's New Place, sees Blue getting her private study, which will be utilized in later episodes this season. As someone who prefers to be in their special place, I can relate. Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper decide to give toys that Paprika doesn't need anymore to the new baby, since she's all grown up. From saying small words to speaking in full sentences, Paprika has come a long way since her introduction in season 1. I grew up so fast. Part 3, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper Day, is sort of a Parents' Day episode, where the gang do nice things to show appreciation for the parents. We learn a little about what our younger selves were like, and it's here where I noticed that sign language was being used extensively. Part 4, The Baby's Here, is the big day. We learn about what the cats were like as babies, which will be expanded upon later. Another relative of the Shaker family shows up, and Lisa Kudrow of Friends fame has a cameo as the baby doctor, who is historic. Yeah, I see what he did there. Paprika officially names the new baby Cinnamon, keeping in touch with the spice motif. He's voiced by Nick Balaban's daughter, Anna Olivia. Part 5, Making Changes, focuses on adapting for a new baby, whether it's changing the way someone acts, or making the house baby-proof for Cinnamon, complete with another little ditty. The Cinnamon storyline overall did a great job helping preschoolers understand what having a new baby may be like. BC always aimed for the big events of preschoolers' lives, so it's no surprise this narrative had high ratings, at least according to the book I read. One minor issue with Blue's News is that Paprika's reveal is so sudden, without any build-up. So I'd say the Simmons storyline handled the reveal much better, slowly building up to Simmons' arrival. When it comes to themes or topics, I couldn't always figure out what some of them were. Like, Something to Do Blue, I guess is another imagination episode. Alternatively, it's one of the few times where Blue doesn't know the answer to Blue's clues.
You know, this is so cool. Blue doesn't even know what the answer to Blue's Clues will be.
On that note, Super Friends is the only instance where Steve sees Blue place the paw print.
You know, I've never actually seen her do that before.
The show still has new topics to explore such as dancing, plants, and bugs. The latter episode has some small trivia behind it. The episode is about exploring bugs and ant colonies, but trivia can be discovered through a case study. This gives a visual, in-depth look at the show's production, the process, written responses, the goal of the episode, etc. The clue set was originally wings, colors, and antenna, but the preschoolers would answer ladybug. The clue set was then changed to wings, colors, and chrysalis. This was done to thematically tie the clues to a butterfly and visually demonstrate a new word. I'd say this was a good move, and further prove how influential research was. The same can probably be said about Blue's Book Nook, an episode about classifying and categorizing books in a library. Marlene Matlin reprises her role as the librarian, providing the viewers with even more sign language. Just as I did for the Plum episode, I checked ASL reference sites for accuracy on the gestures, and they were correct. Blue's Clue feels appropriate since it honors the values the show is built upon. Everyday preschool activities.
One day, I want to go to college.
Oh yeah, let's take a pin on what Steve just said. Anyway, season 4 seemed like business as usual until something came upon our Green Stripe hosts. Behind the scenes anyway. In early 2001, Steve announced that he would be leaving the show after nearly 100 episodes. Why did he make this decision?
Did he, get tired of being rich?
Some say he left because he wanted to pursue a music career, but that's not exactly the case. He simply felt it was time to move on, just as Todd Kessler did. It took so much energy to create joy for every episode and scene that it got tiring. There's also the fact that he did not want to make a career out of hosting children's shows, quoting that he didn't want to become the next Krusty the Clown. And of course, he was fearing going bald in front of children. In one article, he mentioned that he refused to wear a wig, probably because it would look unnatural, or rather fake. Apparently, the people who suggested a wig were the same people who made him wear a rugby shirt and khaki pants. An August 2001 article mentioned how Steve had finished taping his last episode. This might be referring to puppets, which prominently featured the titular sock puppet and discusses how to express emotion through puppetry. Steve's decision was harder for the creators than it probably was for the kids and parents who spent the last 6 years watching him. Despite them being distraught at first, eventually auditions were held for who would become the next host, one of which was Justin Long. He was approached at some point to be the next host, but he couldn't find an agent to negotiate a deal. And when he found one, he turned down BC and would go on to audition for Stuckyville, later renamed Ed. This led him to roles in Jeepers Creepers and Dodgeball. I have never heard of Justin Long, so whether it was a missed opportunity, I can't say. Enter Donovan Patton, a graduate of the Interlochen Arts Academy, who took drama classes and got by with odd jobs, until he auditioned in May 2000. I'm not exaggerating when I say the creators went through 1,500 auditions. Of those auditions, Patton had the best performance. Burns got him through the blue screen and taught him how to be genuine. Apparently, they did Christopher Walken impressions on set.
It's like, what do you want to do today? I'm like, I don't know. Let's ask Blue. Like, there was these two walk-ins going back and forth, and I think, everybody else is just trying not to bust it because they're laughing.
Despite not knowing anything about BC or having prior television experience, Patton was able to nail that same connection with the camera. Burns picked him as the next host, and Joe's test audience proved successful, just as Steve's did. The name Joe was chosen because Donovan was a bit too hard for preschoolers to pronounce. With all this in place, a storyline about meeting Steve's brother was written and researched. This arc was marketed as Joe's Scrapbook, airing as a 3-part 90-minute special on April 29, 2002. This transition gradually introduces Joe while phasing out Steve. The Nick Jr. website at the time gave a taste of what's to come with this transition. It also explains that the episodes were written as standalone, meaning you don't have to watch them in order to understand the context. I argue that you do have to watch them all to understand the story. Imagine just randomly watching one of the parts from the special and being confused when Joe asks this.
It's me, Steve's brother Joe. You taught me how to play Blue's Clues, remember?
Anyway, just as I did for the Simmons storyline, I watched all 3 episodes as they premiere on television. The broadcast order for this trio of episodes is the same as production order, so that makes it easy. Part 1, Joe and Tell, starts with Steve announcing that the gang is having show and tell, until he gets a call from Joe, who's coming for a visit.
What's Joe gonna show? What's Joe gonna show?
I could complain about another relative that everyone just knows being suddenly introduced, but it's not like this hasn't happened before. We get a brief description of what Joe is like, and looking back, I have to wonder. They were playing this all along, weren't they?
I'm John.
I'm Jack. I'm Joe.
Nah, I seriously doubt Joe was playing from the start. If anything, the character was only created for the sake of the storyline. His character isn't quite fleshed out yet, but we get a taste of his interest during show and tell, so I'd say he makes a good first impression. Patton and Burns play off each other naturally. I can buy these two are brothers with how much chemistry they share. Burns even recounts some of the best times on BC were working with Patton. Aww, brotherly love at its finest. Part 2, Joe Gets a Clue, has Steve teach Joe the game of Blue's Clues. This calls back to how Burns taught Patton how to host behind the scenes. Joe's shown to be more instant nature here, not quite understanding the gist of the game, but eventually he gets the hang of it. Two people once again solve BC, and it's cool to see what skidooing looks like from the inside and the outside. This episode also has a record for the fastest time two clues were found separately. At the end, Blue gives Joe his own notebook, shaped like the thinking chair, so that he can play Blue's Clues whenever. And that leads into the big kahuna, part 3, Steve Goes to College. Remember that pin from earlier? Steve announces to the others that he's going away to college.
Today, I'm going to college.
Steve is going to college.
The way he explains what college is like is done in a well-executed and nuanced manner for the preschoolers who may want to go to college themselves. Sanamir explained this was the only way preschoolers would be okay with Steve leaving Blue, and that the show was in good hands. Joe then announces he'll be moving in and taking over the household. Him and Steve once again play Blue's Clues together as they figure out what Blue thinks Steve should bring to college. Side note, there's a small moment where Steve is about to get his notebook only to realize that he doesn't have it with him. Bro has been doing this for so many years, it's become a habit. He has his final mail time and skidoo segment. The latter scene shows a taste of what college is like, the dorms, the cafe, and the classrooms. As someone who graduated from college twice, I can confirm everything Steve says is true. Meanwhile, Joe and everyone else plan for a surprise good luck party for Steve. This just might be the biggest tearjerker scene of the whole show. The characters all acknowledge how sad it'll be to not have him around anymore. But the dialogue that Steve gets after hugging Blue and before he leaves for the bus is very genuine and uplifting to those who watched BC from the beginning. I'd be lying if I said I didn't cry on the inside.
I'm gonna miss you too. I'll never forget how you helped me find all those clues. You really are so smart.
The episode ends with Steve calling Joe and Blue, telling the viewers to have fun with Joe. There are two versions of the credits for Steve Goes to College. The version of Joe's scrapbook ends with a preview of future Season 5 adventures. The regular version shows the bus on its way to college, while Periwinkle, Magenta, and the other neighbors wave goodbye. Just like Season 2, this narrative introduces new aspects while worrying of old aspects. Joe tells us the last time Steve plays BC solo. Joe Gets a Clue marks the last use of Steve's double bass leitmotif when drawing, and Steve Goes to College gives us a taste of what Joe being a host will be like, as well as the last time the clothing from Seasons 1 to 4 was used. The goal of the arc was to get the preschoolers used to Joe and explain Steve's departure to college, and I'd say mission accomplished. Patton mentioned how the creators have been careful with every step of this transition. As much as I think the Joe arc was handled well, my only issue is that it's asking the 2 to 5-year-old audience to accept this random guy they just met taking over the show. Especially when other children's media handled this transition better, like how Sam Moran, who previously worked as a backing vocalist and dancer, took over Greg Page's role for a certain Australian band. I guess making changes wasn't kidding when talking about adjusting for someone new. But Steve Goes to College teaches a mature lesson to children that sometimes things change, and while it's hard, you have to move on. In spite of Season 4 being a tad weak or of nothing noteworthy, this season's ending is memorable for all the right reasons. The day Steve left for college is the day kids watching him grew up, and that's a strong feeling to have.
I am forever indebted to the creators of Blue's Clues for allowing me the opportunity to be a part of children's television history. I will miss them and all the Blue's Clues characters, and I wish Donovan as many good times and magical moments as I had.
I can't wait to play Blue's Clues with you again. It's gonna be great, don't you think, Blue? Well, I'll see you soon.